Hey everyone, this is Fran from the 5-Minute Modeler. In today's video, I'm continuing to build out my Mackinaw City Docks module. In the last video, I airbrushed the track and finished the wiring for both DC and DCC, and here's a link to that video. Over the last week, I built the structures for the layout, completed the apron, and started to figure out how I'm going to model the water surrounding the docks. So let's jump in. Researching photos of the area over the years, I identified 3 primary structures that I wanted to include in this module. The first of this is a small shack of a building. I'm not sure what it was used for, but it sat close to the apron, so I suppose it had something to do with that. To model this, since I had no plans, I had to develop my own. Using the windows as a guide, I determined that the structure was likely around 10 to 12 feet wide and about 20 feet long. It had horizontal siding, windows on each side, and a door, though it wasn't visible in the photos. Once I made my measurements, it was easy enough to cut the pieces from laser-cut siding material that I had. I cut 4 pieces for each of the sides of the building. I also used windows that I had on hand from an unknown manufacturer. Maybe you know who these were from. I marked the windows and used an X-Acto knife to remove the material. I also created a base with balsa wood with a frame around it to allow me to secure the sides to this. In a fit of significant irrelevance, I also used some wood siding material to model the floor inside. Once that was done, I primed the pieces by taping them to a board to minimize the area I needed to spray. I sprayed the insides first with a camouflage tan color. I thought I would model it with the door open so one could peek inside. Once that dried, I painted the exterior of the walls and the windows with the gray primer. Now that the walls were dry, I began to paint the building. I wanted it to appear well worn, but still functional, unlike the previous pictures which showed it in decay. I did this using the dry brush method, where I put a little white paint onto the brush, wiped most of it off, and then brushed horizontally across the boards. Even with the primer, the wood still soaked up the paint, and it took longer than I expected. However, in the end, I think I achieved that well-worn look. One element I added was to keep the paint near the eaves of the roof more white and not as worn. While I couldn't see this detail in the pictures, I have seen this effect on other weathered buildings where the roof provides protection to the paint. I assembled the building with white glue applied to both the base and the edges of the walls, then held together until they set. I placed a piece of balsa spanning the short width of the building for a bit of additional support. I created the roof using balsa wood. To create the shingles, I cut pieces of painter's tape starting from the bottom strips and applied them to the piece on the top. I then dry brush painted this with several shades of gray craft paint to obtain the right effect. I added a smoke jack from one of my parts bins to finish the effect of the active building. One of the pictures that really got me into modeling this scene was this one here. It shows the apron and the ship wide open, waiting for cars. There's a building in the foreground, rather nondescript, which looks like it was hastily made of plywood. Again, I didn't know what this building was for, but it had a couple of interesting signs on it that I wanted to include. The first sign was, "Do not cross the yellow line with the engines." It sits on top of the roof. Another one is some sort of keep out unauthorized people only type of sign. I'm going to include those on this building. Now the building doesn't have much to it. It appears to have a door on one side and a window on the other. And it has either a flat roof or a sloped roof. I chose to model it with a sloped roof. The building pieces were cut from 0.3 millimeter styrene. I used posts of styrene to provide a surface to glue the sides to and created a wooden floor. Using a red oxide primer, I spray painted the structure. I used some old Campbell HO scale corrugated steel for the roof. Despite it being labeled HO scale, I think it works fine for this application. Again, I use craft paints to color the roof. The apron is the third structure here. I scratch built the gallows part earlier in the year out of strip wood. I couldn't find any plans for this, so I relied on pictures of both the real one and an HO model built by someone in one of the clubs near Grand Rapids, Michigan. I didn't plan on making it operable, so I just needed to capture the essence of the structure. I first built the bridge to the ship. This appeared to be a steel structure, much like any deck-type bridge. Because of the unique size and design, I decided to create this on my own with styrene. I first built the sides and used very thin styrene strips to create the pieces around the structure as well as the vertical supports. With both sides done, I then created a frame underneath and added a wood deck for the rails to sit on. For the gallows, I stained all the strip wood with Minwax walnut stain, and then once the stain had dried, I glued the structure together with white glue. Using the same method I used for the bridge, I created the smaller supports on top that held the counterweights and attached to the bridge. Counterweights were made from small cardboard tubing and a piece of styrene cemented to the top. Before I glued this, though, I ran black thread through a hole in the center and threaded it through a pre-drilled hole in the support beams. Just quickly, I also created bollards which are used on the shore to tie the ship up. These appeared to be circular and about 3 foot tall and have a crossbar welded in place. I used a wooden skewer and drilled small holes every 4 feet or so, then took small strips of copper wire, I believe it was 22 gauge, and applied some glue and slid them through the holes. I then painted them with gray primer rattle can. Later, I'll cut them to the appropriate size and place them along the wall parallel to the ship. Okay, for water. I've talked a lot about the water in previous videos. I needed to find a way to model this water in a realistic manner around the docks. One side of the dock faces north, and that is the direction that is exposed to the waves. The ship side faces south and is generally more calm. I researched many different ways of building and painting water. In the end, I decided to try something that I've never tried before, and that is to use the toilet paper method to create the water surface. If you haven't seen this method, you basically place pieces of toilet paper where you want the water, then apply a diluted white glue mixture. I probably used 5 parts water to 1 part glue or something in that ballpark. I didn't really measure. But you apply that to the toilet paper. I applied several layers of toilet paper after applying a new layer of glue water to each one. While it was wet, I used my paintbrush to gently push the toilet paper around to simulate small waves going in generally the same direction. After the glue dried overnight, I was very impressed with the results. Well, that wraps it up for this video. I'll be working more on the water and the riprap retaining wall and who knows what else in the next episode. But thanks for watching and have a great week.